Thomas Castellanos transferring in from Boston College to be the starting quarterback for a Seminoles team that had an abysmal season in 2024, finishing just 2-10 the year after going 13-0. I was not expecting that whatsoever, and I don't think that anybody was. But Seminoles should be much better this season, although the start to the season is not easy whatsoever with a matchup against Alabama. The Crimson Tide in year two under Kalen better than they were last season, and they were still a really solid team last year. Jalen Milroe is gone, but he will likely be replaced with Ty Simpson, currently in a quarterback battle, but is the projected winner. We do think that Alabama is a significantly better team than Florida State, though. Even though the Seminoles are at home, and this is a tough road environment for a player to go in their first ever road trip as the starting quarterback, I think that the Crimson Tide will be able to get a win here to drop Florida State to 0-1. Then it's two really easy home matchups separated by a bye week. East Texas A&M will be a win, and then after the bye week, Kent State also a win before heading into ACC play at 2-1.
And that first ACC game will be a road trip to Virginia. Virginia is one of the lower teams in the ACC, but they've always been a team that you kind of have to watch out for that is good for at least one upset. They do have North Texas quarterback Chandler Morris transferring in, and overall, Virginia is going to be around the same spot they were last year, probably floating around 500, maybe a little bit above, maybe a little bit below at the worst or best case scenario. I do think early on in the season with this Florida State team that has a lot of new faces, they might be able to pull off an upset on they might be able to pull off an upset at home against the Seminoles team. And that's what we're going to go with. I think Florida State's secondary is going to be a little young and needs to see some improvement very early on. And maybe with East Texas and Kent State games, they will be able to sort things out. But I think defensively, they need to figure it out quick. Otherwise, they might be in danger of dropping this Virginia game.
And then next, it's Miami at home. And Miami going to be a really solid team this year, bringing in a Carson Beck from Georgia in the transfer portal to be the starting quarterback. And I think that he's going to lead a very solid Miami offense. He's obviously not as good as Cam Ward was, because Cam Ward ended up going number one overall in the NFL draft. I don't think anybody expects that from Carson Beck. But the Hurricanes are still going to be a really good team. And despite having to go on the road to Florida State, I think that they will be able to get this win, dropping the Seminoles to 2-3.
Following week, hoping to get in the win column, especially in the ACC, they will be hosting Pitt, and Pitt's going to be an interesting team next year. They have Eli Holstein returning as their starting quarterback after a pretty good year. They also have their starting running back returning in Desmond Reed, who also had a pretty solid year, almost reaching 1,000 rushing yards. But the story for Pitt is that they started the season 7-0 last year, were ranked in the top 25, especially after beating Syracuse, where Kyle McCord threw, I believe, three pick sixes. And then they proceeded to lose 5 games in a row in the regular season and then dropped their bowl game to Toledo in 6 overtimes. Now they need to figure out what they need to do to avoid a skid like that again. And it's going to start on defense because the Pitt defense was very good last year through the first half of the season, but did collapse in the second half, like the rest of the team. If they can avoid that, Pitt's going to be a dark horse team in the ACC. But I think Florida State offensively, with so many new additions, like Thomas Castellanos at quarterback, but with Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White joining the wide receiver room, this offense is going to be very explosive. It's going to be night and day compared to the DJU led offense last season. This is where Florida State will get their first ACC win against a very good Pitt team.
And then it's a road trip all the way across the country to Stanford, the Atlantic Coast Conference team on the Pacific Coast. And they're really not going to be a very good team this year. Not much talent really anywhere on this roster. I don't think that Florida State's going to struggle much in that one. They'll move to 4-3 before a bye week. And another one of the worst teams in the ACC in Wake Forest. The Demon Deacons also just really not much there. Florida State's also playing at home here. I think they'll win this one pretty easily as well, moving them up to 5-3.
And those three ACC wins in a row put them 2 wins ahead of their ACC win total last year. So this is going to be a great season already for Florida State fans, but it's going to get a little bit more difficult here with a road trip to Death Valley to face Clemson, the front runners in the ACC going into next season. And rightfully so. Cade Klubnik back as the starting quarterback, early Heisman candidate. They have Peter Woods and TJ Parker on the defensive line, both top 5 talents in next year's NFL draft. And they, of course, have Dabo Swinney as their head coach, one of the best in college football right now. And he finally decided to utilize the transfer portal. And he has built a phenomenal team, a team that looks like they can compete for a college football championship, like the Trevor Lawrence led teams a couple of years ago. This Clemson team against Florida State, I think, is going to easily get a win here, especially at home. Florida State offensively might be able to hang for a little bit, but defensively, I think with the amount of new blood they have, especially in the secondary, and with the defensive line not really winning very much last year in the trenches, I think that's going to be the difference, and this is ultimately going to result in a loss for the Seminoles.
Then it's back home to face Virginia Tech, the Hokies returning Kyron Drones at the quarterback position. But overall, the rest of the roster's not quite as good. I do think that Virginia Tech is still going to be a solid team, but Florida State might be the more talented team here. I think that they'll get a key bounce back win from that Clemson loss and get back in the win column here and bowl eligible at 6-4. And then it's a road trip to NC State, the Wolfpack returning young quarterback CJ Bailey. And overall, that's the theme of the NC State team is a young team with a lot of potential. And while this year might not be the year that they could push for an ACC title, next season possibly could be. They are a dangerous team to face. And yes, I do think that Florida State, as the more experienced team, should be favored on the road here. And that is why we are going to give the Seminoles a win, but it really could go either way. I just trust Thomas Castellanos a bit more in this scenario as the more experienced quarterback. Not to say that CJ Bailey or NC State as a whole is a bad team. I really think they're going to be solid this year, but maybe a year out on really contending for anything.
And then to finish off the season, they are on the road against Florida. The Gators returning DJ Lagway as their starting quarterback after he had an incredible freshman season that was derailed slightly by injuries. But the sky's the limit for Lagway after he nearly willed Florida himself to a win over Georgia before going down with an injury. I think if he's able to stay healthy, he is definitely going to be a Heisman candidate and could lead this Florida team to potentially competing for an SEC title or sneaking into the college football playoffs. Really, it's just going to come down to the fact that this is a road game for Florida State. The Swamp is one of the most difficult places to play in. DJ Lagway is the better quarterback in this matchup. And despite the weapons Florida State has, I think defensively, Florida is going to be able to minimize their impact and get a win in this in-state rivalry game, dropping Florida State to 7-5, but still a remarkable improvement from last year's 2-10 campaign.
Yeah, and I think that they even have room to improve further into 2026, but 7-5 really where we like them for this year. The way too early projection was 7.1 wins, and we predicted them to go 6-6. The prediction came up just a little bit to 7-5, and the projection up to 7.2 and 4.8. 4.8 wins and 3.2 losses in ACC play. The floor for the Seminoles this season, I do think, is still below a bowl game. They could go 5-7, but that's really the worst case scenario that we see. And then the ceiling all the way up to 9-3. It all really depends on Thomas Castellanos because he looked really solid in those first few games at Boston College, including the win over Florida State. I think that if he can reach that potential this season, maybe Florida State can hit that 9-win mark. But we're going to go with 7-5 as our official predictions. So thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in our next video.